Hello, welcome to another Burgundy with Tweedy video. This is another example of me hunting around for Burgundy bargains. This is a Cote de Nuits village. I suppose you could call that an appellation that's sort of a step up from just generic Bourgogne Rouge, and there is also that appellation Bourgogne Côte d'Or. I would consider this a step up from there, and it represents, is it 5 or is it 7 villages that are at the northern and southern extreme of the Cote de Nuits that don't get to have their own appellation. And this particular plot that, or possibly combination of plots that this wine is drawn from, are, I believe, in Courgaloin. Is that down in the south? I think maybe near Nuits Saint-Georges, if I recall correctly. The producer is called Domane de Bellene, and it's a 2019 vintage, which has been an almost universally good vintage. So I have, reasonably high expectations for this. I'll put the price on screen. It was, relatively reasonably priced by the crazy standards of Burgundy. I've had wine from Domane de Bellene before, and they have these kind of partial wax seals on them, which is unusual. And you can actually see, I don't know if that's coming out on camera, you can see the cork, you can see the writing on the cork inside the bottle, which is a bit weird. Slightly concerned by how transparent that glass is, particularly were this a sparkling wine. I would be worried about light strike, that the sunlight might have a potential for damaging this, but I assume this has spent all of its life until now in dark cellars. This is probably the first time it's been outdoors. As always with these wax seals, I believe the strategy is to just sort of plunge straight through with the wine prongs or whatever you're using, a corkscrew perhaps, to open the wine. And you do sometimes end up with little bits of wax in the glass, which is not great. I wonder if there's a better strategy for this. I'm sure they wouldn't be putting any kind of highly toxic wax substance on the top of a bottle of something that you're going to be drinking. I think Tom from Fingal Rock once commented that a wax seal on a bottle is a sign of the prestige that the winemaker believes that it should have. Not necessarily the actual prestige of the wine, but the it's a signal from the winemaker that they think this is something a bit fancy. Yeah, there are indeed bits of wax in there. Okay, this isn't really going to come out very well on this camera, but there's a really nice table almost of technical information about the wine here. What do we have then? Sorry, I've gone straight for a swirl without a pre-swirl nose there. It's one of those berry fruit sort of characters, I think, rather than stone fruit or cherry. Strawberry, raspberry sort of thing, rather than cherry. There is something a bit different from usual there, though. There might be possibly some other fruit characters there. Maybe even a little bit of something like blueberry, maybe myrtle, and something else which gives me a fruity sort of sense, but I can't quite put my finger on what it is. And then there's also a little bit of kind of something slightly seared or burnt there. I hope you can actually hear me over the wind. A grilled apple or a grilled pear or something like that. Cooked apple, cooked pear. It's quite surprising and unusual in a Burgundy. And it's almost veering a tiny bit towards that struck match note, which I'm really not a fan of. Something I more often encounter in sparkling wine rather than red wine. But it's not quite there. It's sort of stopping a bit short of that. Definitely something else going on that I can't quite characterize. Sorry. Okay. Interesting. It is, sorry, probably wind noise now. It is a bit more serious and savoury, I think, on the palate than that nose would suggest. I was getting quite a sweet fruit bowl of red berry fruit on the nose, plus that slightly odd other thing that I can't quite put my finger on. But then, certainly not extremely so, but the palate has a little bit more, as I say, savouriness. Struggling with words again here, aren't I? Can't quite characterise that. In between fruity and savoury. It's quite dry. I think that's part of it. It's part of what I'm experiencing there. Some sort of subtle tannin there. Slightly woody, slightly peppery, perhaps. Still getting that on the finish there. Quite a long time afterwards, I'm still getting that slight sense of, I don't know, almost resiny, woody, peppery sort of tannic sense. But you know, that savoury note to it I actually quite like. Quite often when a wine comes across as savoury from the outset like that, it can often mean it's a little bit severe and lacking fruit character, but that isn't the case here. The fruit is definitely still present on the palate, and there's this savoury note. How can I characterise that? It's not Marmite, but there is something a little bit in that kind of ballpark of almost Marmite. Weird. There must be some acidity there in amongst that, but yeah, it's quite nice fruit on the palate plus something savoury. I seem to be having a really hard time characterising this wine properly. Quite unlike anything I've had before, actually. Not necessarily in a bad way. I think I'm enjoying this. It doesn't immediately fall into these kind of stereotypes of several different wine styles I've had from Burgundy before that I've really enjoyed. It is something a bit different and nice in its own way. It has a nice weight to it. As I say, a sort of savouriness, a seriousness to it on the palate, but still fruit expression there. But beyond that, I'm really struggling with that. Really finding it difficult to describe. A bit of an enigma. I'm running out of words, I think, so perhaps we'll leave that as a giant question mark. Definitely not bad. 2019 seems to be almost guaranteed to produce something at least interesting and quite often good. I don't know, this is obviously in that stable of those perfectly ripe 2019. I'm not saying it's not ripe, but you know, 2019 is characterised by this lovely level of ripeness in the fruit. And there is definitely quite interesting fruit expression here, but there's also a lot of other things going on that have kind of derailed my ability to interpret this. Maybe I'll just give up. It's an enigma. Interesting. I would enjoy that as a one-off. Whether or not I would buy another one of those, I don't know, but definitely not boring. Cheers.